Word spread faster than wildfire across the colony. Daniel Morris, the war veteran who had lost his family to the Khazari, was now sheltering a Khazari woman and her child. Some colonists shrugged and minded their own business. Others muttered darkly in the taverns and supply stations. A few began to organize. Daniel first noticed the change when he visited the central hub for supplies. People who had nodded politely for years now turned away when he approached. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. The shopkeeper, who had always given him fair prices, suddenly found reasons to charge more. Small cruelties, accumulating like dust on. Then came the confrontation. Cole Barrett was waiting for him outside the equipment depot. He stood with 3 other men, all of them veterans of the war. Cole had served in the infantry. He had lost his younger brother to a Khazari ambush in the 2nd year of the conflict. His hatred was old and deep, and had found no peace in the years since. Cole stepped forward and asked Daniel if it was true. Was he really keeping one of them on his farm? Was he feeding and housing the enemy while human graves still lay fresh in the cemetery? Daniel felt the old anger rise up in his chest. He knew these men. He understood their pain. He had carried the same darkness for years. But something had changed inside him during that storm. Something had broken loose when Myra's eyes had met his. He told Cole that Yelani was his employee. She cooked and cleaned. She was a war widow, same as many human women across the colonies. She had lost her husband just like they had lost their friends and families. The war was over. It was time to stop fighting. Cole's face twisted with rage. He said the war would never be over. Not while a single Khazari still breathed. Not while human blood still stained the soil of 100 worlds. He said Daniel was a traitor to his own kind. He said there would be consequences. Daniel stood his ground. He told Cole that he had spent 7 years hating the Khazari. He had dreamed of revenge every night. He had wished death on every member of their species. And in all that time, the hatred had given him nothing but more emptiness, more pain, more reasons to wish he had died with his wife and daughter. The other men shifted uncomfortably. One of them, younger than the others, would not meet Daniel's eyes. Daniel continued. He said that Yelani had not killed Karen and Lily. She had been thousands of light years away when the raid happened. Her husband had been teaching children mathematics. The people responsible for the attack were dead, killed in the war's final battles. Hating Yelani would not bring anyone back. It would only add more suffering to a galaxy that already had too much. Cole stepped closer, his fists clenched. For a moment, Daniel thought the man would strike him. But Cole just spat at his feet and turned away, leading his followers back toward the tavern. He promised this was not finished. That night, Daniel sat with Yelani and told her what had happened. He did not sugarcoat the danger. He explained that some of the colonists might try to hurt her. He showed her the emergency beacon that could summon help from the central hub. He took her to the hidden shelter beneath the grain silo, a reinforced room built during the war for exactly this kind of situation. Yelani listened quietly. When he finished, she asked him why he was doing this. Why was he risking his reputation, his standing in the community, his safety? She was just a Khazari widow. She was nothing to him. Daniel did not answer right away. He looked at Mira, sleeping peacefully in her sling. He thought about the moment when those silver eyes had met his during the storm. He thought about the walls that had crumbled inside him. He told her that she was not nothing. He said that for 7 years he had been dead inside, just a body moving through the world without purpose or meaning. He said that she and Myra had awakened something in him that he thought was gone forever. He could not explain it better than that. Yelani's silver eyes glistened in the lamplight. She reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him since her arrival. The attack came at midnight, 3 days later. Cole and his men approached the farmhouse under cover of darkness. Daniel had been expecting them. He had barely slept since the confrontation. He met them at the property line, unarmed, standing alone in the moonlight. Cole demanded that he step aside. He said they were there for the Kasari. They would not harm Daniel if he cooperated. They just wanted to send a message. Daniel did not move. He told them that there had been enough death, enough hatred, enough messages written in blood. If they wanted to add more, they would have to go through him first. The men hesitated. Daniel was one of them. A human, a veteran, a man who had suffered at Khazari hands just as they had. The younger man spoke up. His name was Peter Walsh. He said his sister would not want this. She had been a nurse during the war. She had treated soldiers from both sides. She had believed that healing was always possible. She had died believing that. Peter lowered his weapon and walked away. Another man followed. Then another, until only Cole remained, standing alone in the darkness. His gun pointed at Daniel's chest. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Cole lowered his weapon. He told Daniel that this changed nothing, that the Khazari were still the enemy, that Daniel had made a choice he would regret. Then he walked away into the night. Daniel stood alone for a long time, watching the darkness where his neighbors had disappeared. He did not know if he had won anything. He did not know if the danger was truly past. But he knew that he had done what was right. When he finally turned back toward the farmhouse, Yelani was standing in the doorway. Mira was awake in her arms, silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. They were both watching him with expressions he could not quite read. He walked toward them, toward home. 6 months had passed since the night Cole Barrett and his men had come to the farm. Spring was arriving on Veldris 4, painting the grain fields in shades of gold and green. The twin suns hung warm and bright in the sky, and the land felt alive in ways that Daniel had almost forgotten were possible. Mira was walking now. Her small blue legs carried her through the fields with increasing confidence, her silver eyes wide with wonder at every new discovery. She had learned a handful of words, a mixture of human and Kasari sounds that only Daniel and Yelani could understand. When she saw Daniel approaching, she would toddle toward him as fast as her legs could carry her, reaching up with her 4-fingered hands and calling out something that sounded like his name. Daniel had never imagined he could feel this way again. The weight that had pressed down on his heart for 7 years had not disappeared entirely, but it had shifted. It had made room for something new, something that felt dangerously close to happiness. The colony had slowly begun to accept the situation. Not everyone approved. Cole Barrett still glared at Daniel whenever their paths crossed in town. But Peter Walsh and his friends had started nodding hello again. The shopkeeper had returned to offering fair prices. A few of the other farmers had even hired Kasari workers of their own. Following Daniel's example, the Lani had become an essential part of the farm's operation. Daniel had taught her to run the harvesting equipment, to maintain the irrigation systems, to read the weather patterns, to determine when to plant and when to reap. In return, she had taught him Khazari planting songs, ancient melodies that she claimed improved crop yields through sound vibration. He pretended to be skeptical, but he found himself singing along anyway, his rough human voice blending with her musical tones as they worked side by side in the fields. They had stopped pretending to be employer and employee months ago. They ate meals together now, talking long into the evening about everything and nothing. They laughed at Mira's discoveries, shared stories from their past lives, and sat in comfortable silence watching the twin moons rise over the hills. Something had grown between them, quiet and steady, like a plant putting down roots in fertile soil. On a clear morning in early spring, a Khazari diplomatic vessel appeared in the colony's sky. Daniel watched it descend toward the central hub, a cold weight forming in his stomach. Diplomatic vessels meant officials. Officials meant attention. Attention meant danger for Kazari living among humans. Yelani saw his concern and placed her hand on his arm. She told him not to worry. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The official arrived at the farm that afternoon. He was tall and thin, with the pale blue skin and silver eyes that marked all Kazari. He wore the formal robes of a clan representative, and his expression was carefully neutral as he approached the farmhouse. Delani met him at the door. They spoke in their native language, too fast and musical for Daniel to follow. He watched from a few steps back, his hands clenched at his sides, ready to intervene if necessary. The conversation lasted several minutes. When it finally ended, the official bowed to Yelani in a gesture of formal respect. Then he turned and walked back toward his transport without a word to Daniel. Yelani stood frozen in the doorway. Her silver eyes were wide with shock. Daniel asked what had happened. What did the official want? Yelani told him that her name had been cleared. The stigma of war widowhood had been lifted by a new reform movement among her people. Her family was willing to acknowledge her again. Her clan would take her back. She could return home. Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He had known this moment might come. He had tried not to think about it, tried to focus on each day as it arrived. But now it was here, and he realized with sudden terrible clarity how much he had to lose. He asked her what she wanted to do. Delani turned to look at him. Her silver eyes searched his face, reading the emotions he could not hide. She had always been able to see through his walls, even when those walls had been at their strongest. She told him that the official had offered her a place with her clan, a home among her own people, safety and acceptance after years of wandering and rejection. Daniel nodded. He understood. He told her that he would help her pack. He would arrange transport to the diplomatic vessel. He would make sure she and Myra had everything they needed for the journey. Yelani shook her head. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. She told him that the official had offered her a place with her clan, but she had declined. Daniel stared at her, unable to speak. She told him that home was not a place or a people. Home was where the heart felt safe. Home was where love lived. She had found her home here, on this farm, with him and Mira. She was not leaving. Daniel felt tears running down his face for the second time since Yelani had arrived. He reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her the way he had been afraid to hold anyone for 7 years. He told her that he had spent so long believing his heart had died with Karen and Lily. He had been so certain that he would never feel this way again. He told her that he had been wrong. His heart had not died. It had just been waiting, buried under years of grief and anger, until she and Myra had found it and brought it back to life. Yelani pulled back slightly and looked into his eyes. Then she did something she had never done before. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. The Kazari gesture of deepest intimacy and trust. They stood like that for a long moment, human and Kazari. Two wounded souls who had found healing in the most unlikely of places. Mira came toddling out of the house, attracted by the sound of their voices. She looked up at them with her enormous silver eyes and raised her arms, demanding to be included. Daniel lifted her, settling her between them, feeling her small body warm against his chest. The three of them walked out into the grain fields together. The twin suns painted everything in shades of gold. The breeze carried the scent of growing things. Somewhere in the distance, other farmers were beginning their spring planting. Daniel looked at the woman beside him and the child in his arms. He thought about all the paths that had led them here, all the pain and loss and unexpected grace. He thought about the future stretching out before them, uncertain but full of possibility. He was a human who had lost everything to war. She was a Kazari widow who had been cast out by her own people. Together, they had built something that neither species could have imagined. A family. Not bound by blood, but by choice. By healing. by the stubborn, beautiful human capacity to love again, even when love seemed impossible. Daniel smiled as they walked through the golden fields. For the first time in 7 years, he was not afraid of tomorrow. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was clear and golden with the light of the twin suns. The next moment, darkness rolled across the horizon like a living thing. Electromagnetic storms were common on Veldris 4, but this one was different, stronger, more violent. The kind of storm that old settlers talked about in whispered voices. Daniel barely made it back to the farmhouse before the first wave hit. The power died instantly. The communication arrays went silent. The windows rattled in their frames as wind and charged particles battered the structure. He secured the storm shutters and checked the emergency generators, but even the backup system struggled against the electromagnetic interference. They would be trapped inside for days. The colony's weather stations had confirmed it before the communications failed. 3 days minimum, possibly more. 3 days alone with Yelani and Myra. The first day passed in tense silence. They sat in the main room, listening to the storm rage outside. Daniel worked on equipment repairs by candlelight. Yelani prepared cold meals from stored supplies. Myra lay in her sling, silver eyes tracking the dancing shadows on the walls. No one spoke. The second day was different. Perhaps it was the darkness. Perhaps it was the constant howling of the wind. Perhaps it was simply the weight of so much silence. Whatever the reason, Daniel found himself talking. He asked about her husband. The question surprised both of them. Yeleni looked at him for a long moment, her silver eyes reflecting the candlelight. Then she answered. His name was Torvin. He was a teacher. He worked with young children, teaching them mathematics and science. He had gentle hands and a kind voice. He made her laugh in ways no one else ever had. When the war reached its desperate final phase, the Khazari military began conscripting everyone who could hold a weapon. Torvin had never fired a gun in his life. He died in his first engagement, fighting for a cause he did not believe in. Against an enemy he had never hated. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he found himself sharing his own story. He told her about Karen, who had been a botanist studying the native plants of Meridian 3. He told her about Lily, who had just learned to help in the kitchen, who loved to sing songs she made up herself, who had her mother's smile and her father's stubborn streak. He told her about the Khazari raid that had killed them both while he was away at a medical conference. He told her about the guilt that had consumed him ever since Karen had begged him to move to a safer colony. She had warned him that the frontier was dangerous. He had refused because he loved the land, loved the challenge, loved the idea of building something from nothing. His stubbornness had killed his family. Yelani shook her head. She told him that the ones who launched the raid had killed his family, not him. She said that guilt was a heavy burden to carry for so long. She said she understood because she carried her own. They talked through the night. About the war. About loss. About the strange paths that had led them both to this farmhouse on a frontier world. About the ways that grief could hollow out a person until nothing remained but an empty shell going through the motions of living. On the third night, Mira developed a fever. Khazari infants were vulnerable to temperature fluctuations, especially during electromagnetic storms when the atmospheric conditions became unstable. Yeleni's panic was immediate and overwhelming. She held her daughter close, silver eyes wide with terror, her body trembling. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Something old and buried, something he had thought was dead forever. He crossed the room and took Myra from Yeleni's arms. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the muscle memory of his medical training returning after years of dormancy. He checked the infant's pulse. He examined her eyes. He felt the heat radiating from her small blue body. He told Yelani to get cold water and clean cloths. He told her to find the medical kit in the storage room. He told her that Myra was going to be fine. He would make sure of it. For the next 8 hours, Daniel worked without rest. He monitored Myra's temperature constantly. He applied cooling compresses when the fever spiked. He adjusted the infant's position to help her breathe more easily. He stayed awake while Yelani finally collapsed from exhaustion, maintaining his vigil over the tiny creature in his arms. He was not going to let another child die. Not on his watch. Not ever again. As dawn broke, and the storm finally began to fade, Myra's fever broke with it. Her silver eyes fluttered open and looked directly at Daniel's face. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Human and Kesari. Two species that had spent decades killing each other. Then Mira reached up with her small, four-fingered hand and touched Daniel's cheek. Something cracked open inside him. Something that had been sealed shut for 7 years. He felt tears running down his face, falling onto Mira's blanket. He felt the walls around his heart crumbling. He felt alive in a way he had forgotten was possible. Yelani woke to find him still holding her daughter, still crying, still unable to look away from those silver eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. She did not speak. She simply sat beside him and placed her hand on his arm. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel did not pull away from another person's touch. Daniel Morris stood at his kitchen window and watched the dust clouds roll across the grain fields. 3 years had passed since the war ended, but the land still carried scars from the fighting. Craters dotted the northern hills where Kesari bombardments had fallen. The soil was healing slowly, just like everything else on VLDR is -4. He turned away from the window and looked at the message on his datapad. The colony labor office had found someone willing to work on his farm. A cook and housekeeper, they said. Someone to help with the daily tasks that had become too much for one man to handle alone. The expansion contracts meant more work, more fields to tend, more reasons to need another pair of hands. Daniel had resisted for years. He liked his solitude. He had built walls around himself, thick and high, and he was comfortable behind them. But the colony administrator had been clear. Either he accepted help or he would lose the contracts. The choice was not really a choice at all. The transport vehicle appeared on the horizon an hour later. Daniel walked out to meet it, his boots crunching on the dry ground. The vehicle stopped and the door slid open. What stepped out made his blood turn cold. She was Kesari. Pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly in the afternoon light. Four-fingered hands that clutched a bundle against her chest. Large silver eyes that met his gaze and then quickly looked away. She wore simple clothes, worn and patched in several places. A traditional sling held an infant against her body. Daniel felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. The Kesari had taken everything from him. 7 years ago, a raiding party had struck his old homestead on Meridian 3. His wife Karen had died in his arms. His daughter Lily, only 4 years old, had been buried beside her mother 3 days later. He had joined the medical corps after that, spending the rest of the war patching up soldiers so they could go back and fight the enemy that had destroyed his world. And now one of them stood on his land, the transport. Driver handed Daniel a datapad with the work assignment. He signed without reading it, his eyes never leaving the Kesari woman. The driver seemed eager to leave. The vehicle was gone within minutes, leaving Daniel alone with his new employee. She spoke first. Her voice was soft and carried a slight musical quality that all Kesari voices had. She said her name was Yelani Vershin. She said she was grateful for the opportunity. She said she would work hard and cause no trouble. Daniel said nothing. He stared at her, at the infant in her arms, at the silver eyes that would not meet his. His jaw was tight. His chest was tight. Everything inside him screamed to send her away, to refuse this arrangement, to maintain the walls he had built so carefully. He asked her why she was here, why a Khazari would come to work for a human on a frontier colony where her kind was hated. Yeleni's silver eyes finally met his. There was pain in them, deep and old. She told him that her husband was dead, killed by human forces in the final months of the war. She told him that among her people, war widows were considered cursed. Bad luck, marked by death. Her own family had cast her out. Her clan had refused to acknowledge her child. She had nowhere to go. No one would hire her. No one would help her. The labor office had been her last hope. Daniel listened without expression. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction. A Khazari suffering the consequences of a war her people had started. But another part of him, a part he had tried to bury long ago, recognized something in her eyes. He knew that look. He saw it every morning in his own reflection. The infant in her arms stirred. A small blue face emerged from the blankets. Silver eyes, enormous and bright, blinked at the unfamiliar surroundings. The baby made no sound. Khazari infants were silent for their first year. He remembered reading somewhere, a survival adaptation from their ancient past. He asked about the child. Yeleni held the infant closer. She said the baby's name was Mira. She was 8 months old. She had never met her father. He had died 2 weeks before she was born. Daniel stood there for a long moment. The wind blew dust across the yard. The twin suns of Veldris IV hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. He thought about Karen. He thought about Lily. He thought about all the empty years since their deaths. The silence that filled his house, the ghost that walked his hallways at night. He told Yeleni she could stay. 1-month trial period. She would cook and clean and help with whatever tasks he assigned. She would have the small room at the back of the house. She would keep to herself and stay out of his way. If it did not work out, she would leave. No arguments. No second chances. Yeleni bowed her head in the Khazari gesture of gratitude. She thanked him. She promised she would not disappoint him. Daniel turned and walked back toward the house. He did not offer to help carry her single bag of belongings. He did not show her around the property. He simply pointed to the back door and told her to settle in. Dinner was at sunset. She could figure out the kitchen on her own. That night, Daniel ate alone in his room. He heard Yeleni moving quietly through the house, learning its layout, putting away her few possessions. The infant made no sound. The silence felt different now, somehow. Less empty, more complicated. He lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. He told himself this was purely practical. He needed help. She needed work. It was a transaction, nothing more. He would keep his distance. He would maintain his walls. He would not let himself feel anything for this Khazari woman and her silent child. But even as he thought these things, he knew he was lying to himself. Something had shifted the moment Yeleni's silver eyes had met his. Something had cracked in the walls he had built. He did not know what it was. He did not want to know. Outside, the wind whispered through the grain fields. The twin moons rose over the hills, casting pale light through his window. Somewhere in the back room, a Khazari widow held her daughter and wondered if she had finally found a place where they might be safe. Neither of them slept well that night. They both had too many ghosts keeping them company. The first week passed in silence. Daniel left before dawn to work the fields. Yeleni cleaned the house and prepared meals. They spoke only when necessary, exchanging words like strangers passing on a road. The infant Mira watched everything with her enormous silver eyes, taking in this new world without making a sound. Daniel came home each evening to find dinner waiting on the table. Simple dishes at first, things any cook might make. Roasted grain cakes, vegetable stews, bread that was slightly too dense but improved each day. He ate alone while Yelani waited in the kitchen. He never thanked her. She never expected thanks. By the second week, something began to change. The meals became more interesting. Yelani had discovered the spice cabinet that Karen had stocked years ago, untouched since her death. She combined human ingredients with Khazari techniques, creating flavors that Daniel had never experienced. One evening, he found himself eating slowly, actually tasting the food instead of just consuming fuel for his body. He noticed other things too. The house was cleaner than it had been in years. His clothes appeared folded and mended. The windows sparkled. The floors no longer creaked with dust and neglect. Yelani worked constantly, moving through the house like a quiet ghost, always busy, always careful to stay out of his way. Daniel began to watch her when she did not know he was looking. He saw how she flinched whenever he raised his voice, even when his frustration was directed at a broken tool or a stubborn piece of equipment. He saw how she always waited until he finished eating before she took her own portion, as if she expected to receive only whatever scraps remained. He saw the fear that lived behind her silver eyes, the constant alertness of someone who had learned that safety was never permanent. One afternoon, he left extra food on the counter after his meal. He did not say anything. He just left it there and walked out. When he returned that evening, the food was gone. Neither of them mentioned it. But from that day forward, Daniel always left extra. And Yelani always made sure he never saw her take it. The infant Myra grew more active as the weeks passed. She began to crawl across the floor of the back room, exploring her small world with silent determination. Sometimes Daniel would catch glimpses of her through doorways, her silver eyes following his movements with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She looked at him like she was trying to understand something important. He learned that Mira never cried. Khazari babies could not cry in the traditional sense. Their vocal cords did not develop fully until their first birthday. Instead, they communicated through expressions and gestures, their large eyes conveying needs and emotions that human infants would scream about. It was strange at first, seeing a baby in distress without hearing any sound. But Daniel found himself growing accustomed to it. A supply ship arrived at the colony during the 4th week. Daniel went into town to collect his provisions and heard troubling news. Anti-Khazari violence had erupted on the inner colonies. Angry mobs had attacked Khazari businesses and homes. 3 people were dead. The colonial government was trying to maintain order, but old hatreds ran deep on both sides. Daniel returned home that evening with a heavy weight in his chest. He found Yelani in the kitchen, preparing dinner as always. But something was different. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. Her movements were jerky, distracted. She had heard the news somehow. Perhaps from the radio in the supply room. Perhaps from the way the wind carried voices across the empty land. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. He thought about the violence spreading across human space. He thought about the mobs and the anger and the endless cycle of revenge that had fueled the war for decades. He thought about what might happen if that violence reached Vel Dr as -4. He told her she was safe. The words came out before he could stop them. He said that no one would harm her while she was on his land. He said that he would make sure of it. Yelani turned to look at him. Her silver eyes were wide with surprise. She had not expected this. She had expected coldness, distance, the same emotional walls that Daniel had maintained since her arrival. She certainly had not expected protection. She thanked him. Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniel nodded once and left the kitchen. He went to his room and sat on the edge of his bed, wondering what had possessed him to say such things. He was still trying to figure out why he cared what happened to a Khazari widow and her child. That night he dreamed of Lily. His daughter was running through the grain fields, laughing, her small hands reaching up toward the sky. She was 4 years old. the age she had been when she died. In the dream, she stopped and turned to look at him. She pointed at something behind him. He turned and saw Myra standing there, her silver eyes bright in the sunlight. He woke with tears on his face. The first tears he had shed in 7 years. The house was quiet. Through his window, he could see the twin moons hanging low over the hills. Somewhere in the back room, Yelani was holding her daughter, singing a Khazari lullaby in a voice so soft that Daniel could barely hear it through the walls. He lay in the darkness and listened. The song was strange and beautiful, full of notes that human voices could never produce. It was a song about loss, he realized, about grief, about learning to live when everyone you loved was gone. He understood it perfectly.